Okay, our next story, we're going to talk about the Capitol riots, the inquiry into them that's just took place the other day, and the complete meltdown of the right, and how this is, I think we spoke about it the other day, how this is truly exposing some giant cracks in the right, some giant philosophical differences that the different sections of Republicans have. And it's quite terrifying in a way, but also like hilarious because the people on the left, we know we have our differences and we talk about them all the time, especially between the corporate wing and the progressive wing of the Democratic Party. Those lines are clearly defined. But if you look at different sides of the right, the more libertarian sides per se, or the more uh, con- conservatives, or maybe moderate conservatives, Christian conservatives, there's so many different organizations within the right, and they don't really talk too much about their giant differences, especially in ideas of race and ideas of religion and things like that. So this is we're going to talk a lot about the Capitol riots, but first I kind of want to speak on the civil war that seems to be going on within Fox News and Fox News media. So Fox News, Brett Baier hits out that hits out that it's out of Republicans dismissing Capitol riot inquiry. Fox News anchor Brett Baier on Tuesday criticized Republicans who have downplayed the Capitol 6 riot at the U.S. Capitol or have sought to discredit the congressional inquiry into what happened, while Republicans politically are saying that this is a partisan effort and that they charge that it's not going to get questions that they think are important about January 6th, like why were the Capitol Police so ill prepared for what happened that day. You cannot watch this testimony and say that it's not a big deal, he said during the conservative network's coverage of the House Select Committee's first hearing on its investigation. And you cannot watch this testimony and say that there are questions that are going to take us places that I don't think we know we're going to go yet. Earlier, Breyer described the testimony as compelling, at times damning, and emotional. For anybody who looked at that and looked at the videos and their testimony about that day and thought it was not violent, I think this was an eye-opener, he said. 4 police officers who fought a violent mob of Donald Trump supporters during the January 6th attack testified before the committee Tuesday about what they experienced. The officers described brutal violence and fear for their lives. Black officer said he was repeatedly subjected to racial slurs. More than 500 people have been arrested in connection with the attack that injured an estimated 140 police officers who were trying to defend the Capitol. Yet many Republicans have continued to downplay the events of that day and discredit the Democratic-led effort to get to the bottom of it. And this includes some of Breyer's colleagues. Primetime Fox News commentators such as Tucker Carlson and Laura Ingraham persistently push revisionist history about January 6th. Last week, Carlson insulted one of the officers ahead of his testimony Tuesday, dismissing him as a political activist. Now, this this civil war between the right is going to be very interesting if it actually picks up. And I hope it does, because they're talking about things that the right, some of the right wing is not willing to face. They're just not willing to look at it. They're not willing to look at the violence in their own party and the racism and the bigotry. And I'm not saying that the left is perfect. No, far from it. But on the right side, especially in this current environment, there is so much going on that they just don't want to talk about, that they don't want to own up to. I'm a Democrat, and I'll tell you, the Democrats are all sellouts. I will own up to the bad in my own party. They're all sellouts. They're all corporatists. Most of them are war hawks. They support NSA spying. They support drone strikes. This is what Democrats support, at least the worst of my party. That's not what I support, but that is what the worst of the Democrats support. But Republicans and conservatives have a hard time looking in the mirror at their own party, or looking at their own party and saying, this is the worst of us and we need to expunge them. Like the progressives, we say we need to expunge the corporatists from the party. And if Republicans were being honest with themselves and they were being admirable and morally right, they would look at their party and say, we can't have you guys. You can't sit with us anymore. You can't sit with us anymore. Period. Get out of here. So we're going to talk about the Capitol riots. So the four men that testified were Michael Fanone, Daniel Hodges, which were Metropolitan Police, and Harry Dunn and Sergeant Gonell, which were Capitol Police. These men, just from listening to them talk, hearing their words, I can tell that they're all suffering horribly from PTSD. Just the situation they were put in, but just knowing coming from their own mouths and just the emotion that they displayed, it kind of chokes me up just thinking about it. So Harry Dunn, black man, called the N-word multiple times, and of course all the black Capitol Police were, and like that goes without saying, and he felt as disrespected, degraded as a human being, as you would. The Michael Fanone almost lost an eye. Someone tried to gouge his eye out. All of them were called traitors for trying to defend the Capitol from people that were insurrecting it. Let's be honest. Let's use honest words. Let's use the words we really need to use here, and that is another reason I'm appreciating this committee, because they told all about how they really felt. So at the beginning they held a moment of silence for Officer Brian Sicknick, who died from the Capitol riots. He was one of 5 people to die in the Capitol riots that day. 4 other people, all Trump supporters, all people that were within the rally fighting, also died, and multiple police were injured. And even on top of that, you could see that the emotional toll on these officers that day was too much to bear. As you can imagine, the people that you had expected to protect and serve your own brothers and sisters of America are fighting and attacking you, and in your mind, and in that situation, in your mind, they are trying to kill you. You don't expect to make it out. And who could look at a brother and a sister and say and think that was going to happen? So after this took place, 2 officers took their own life, died from suicide because of their emotions were too much to bear. It was too much stress on their mental health. And dozens and dozens of police officers just silently retired because they just couldn't handle it anymore. To be so broken, to be so defeated. And not everybody's like that, no, but I couldn't blame anybody for feeling like that. And yet, this, at the end of the day, I will say this, that the committee was way less partisan than I thought it would be at first. They seemed to be answering very honest and questions that are filled with integrity, and didn't try to be misleading in their statements or in their questions, or what I felt was to vie too much to one side or the other, because honestly the testimony from the officers did enough of that. The politicians didn't have to even lean, because when you lay out the facts, this was a right-wing attack. This was a right-wing domestic terrorist attack. And yet the right wing continues to make light of it. As we discussed, Tucker Carlson, Laura Ingraham, the Ben Shapiro's of the world, these people, even Donald Trump himself, saying that the people were just tourists, that they greeted the officers with hugs and kisses as they went through the door. Well, my man, if those are hugs and kisses, let me find you on the street. I'm sure a lot of people in America would want to hug and kiss the fuck out of you. So, we have the right wing who is telling blatant lies and trying to just whitewash. Usually when they whitewash something, they have to give it some time. This was 6 months ago. This was 6 months ago, and they're trying to already whitewash it from history. That is a skill. But there's some members of the right, Liz Cheney, Adam Kissinger, who are in the committee, and they're just trying to get to the truth. They're called, they're probably going to lose their positions of power in the GOP, lose their status. They're already being called Pelosi Republicans. I'm sure they'll basically be called Democrats. And one of the and let's be honest, Liz Cheney has been a hardcore conservative. She voted for Reaganomics. Like, Liz Cheney is a conservative. She really is. No doubt. I'm not going to sit up here and say I like her. I'm not going to give her credit for literally anything she's probably ever voted for. I don't know her full voting record, but I probably wouldn't give her credit for much of it. But I will give her credit for this. And it makes you really think at the end of the day. Are the right so focused on putting politics over human life? Why are the right so focused on putting politics over the truth? They accuse the left of doing identity politics and playing politics with people's lives, but literally they block everything that would help normal people. And they try to have revisionist history, not only about 300 years ago, but 30 days ago. So at the end of the day, this is going to be the problem, and it's going to, I think it's really going to backfire on the Republicans. I hope it would, because when the only people that you're impressing with that kind of rhetoric is your base and your deep base. That's the only people you're impressing at that point, with calling these people tourists and saying that it wasn't violent. Because at the end of the day, by definition, these people that stormed the Capitol on January 6th were domestic terrorists. The definition of domestic terrorists is acts of a civilian population to influence the policy of the government. That's as simple, clear cut as it can be. So, what do you think it was? It was the actions of civilians and even at that time, the head of the snake, Donald Trump, going against the government and basically rioting and trying to overthrow an election. That is domestic terrorism at its finest. Boom. So it's going to be very interesting, especially when if there's some kind of correlation. Again, I don't believe this will be any criminal charges brought up against Donald Trump, but if they somehow can hardline prove that the majority of those people went there on Trump's orders through these QAnon back alley websites and forums and such, who knows what could happen? So this is already a very disgusting blight on American history. And the fact that Republicans are already trying to cover it up and whitewash it is disgusting. And we need to own up to this fact. We need to say to ourselves that, yes, this happened. It was a huge mistake. And what can we do to make sure it doesn't happen again? What can we do? Because when Black Lives Matter came to the Capitol for their protests, the Capitol Police were stacked to the brim, and Metropolitan Police. But when a bunch of Republicans, majority white Trump supporters, do the same thing and storm the riots and have plans to have protests and gather at the Capitol, there's barely any Capitol Police. There's barely any Metropolitan Police. So if the question is, really, at the end of the day, what Republicans want to know, if the question is why weren't they so prepared, it's because in Washington, black people are inherently more scarier than white people, apparently. They didn't think it was going to be violent. They didn't care. This is a broken, busted system. Just another example of why the system and why the justice system especially is totally broken, where they would not think that they were enough of an issue, or that they really thought that they were totally nonviolent, that they would not be properly prepared for when white people storm the Capitol. But when black people storm the Capitol, everybody's out in force. Republicans are being extra partisan in this in this instance, and it will come and bite them in the ass for sure.